Keep on, 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 keep on.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. Sorry for the slight delay in getting started. We've just had some technical issues, but we are ready to get going. Unfortunately, you will only be able to see me today. For some reason, we can't get Kira's camera going at the same time. So my apologies for that. But yeah, let's get started anyway. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. This is going to take around about 45 minutes, and then we'll try and answer any questions towards the end. So if you have any questions along the way, just put them in the Q&A box. We're recording the session as well, so we might be able to make it available afterwards. And also we'll make the slides available. So if you are interested in getting a copy of them, you can just get in touch with us through our website. Just some introductions then. I'm Garrett Sheridan, Principal UX and Product Designer at Marino, and I'll be joined as well by Kira Fenton, who is the Accessibility Team Lead. Okay, so the agenda for today is we're going to talk about Global Accessibility Awareness Day, which is why we're here. We're going to be talking about exclusion to inclusion, the persona spectrum, empathy, and then some laws and regulations around accessibility that might be interesting. Kira's going to bring us through how to get started implementing accessibility in your organization. We're going to show you some tools and techniques that you'll be able to take away and start using straight away. And then we'll get to some questions. Okay, so what is Global Accessibility Awareness Day? So today, the third Thursday of May every year, which is today, the third Thursday of May, is Global Accessibility Awareness Day. And it focuses on digital access and inclusion. And this is for more than 1 billion people in the world with disabilities and impairments. So as I said, it's every year on the third Thursday of May. And the main purpose behind it all is to get people talking, thinking, learning about digital access and inclusion. And if you feel inspired to maybe raise a bit of awareness yourself, this is the hashtag you can use on Twitter and social, GAAD 2020. So first up, exclusion to inclusion. So it's really important that we recognize that there is exclusion, because once we recognize that exclusion exists, then we're able to start doing something about it. And exclusion happens when we solve problems using our own biases. So if we believe that we are the norm, that's how exclusion kind of starts. So there's no such thing as a normal person. I suppose everybody kind of has this idea that they are normal and that maybe other people see the world as they do, but this is very much not the case. So when we're designing and building and creating products and services for people, if we use our own abilities as a baseline, then we make things that are maybe very easy for some people to use, but they may be very difficult for other people to use. And so the interactions we design with technology, they depend heavily on what we can see, hear, say, touch, all of our senses. But if we assume that all of these senses and abilities, they're fully enabled all of the time for everybody, then this creates, a chance to, the potential for us to ignore a lot of people. So, a big number here, 643,131. That's the number of people in Ireland who are could be classified as disabled, and that's according to the 2016 census. And that's 13.5% of the population, which is, not a small number at all. But it's not really about statistics. It's about people, right? And when we're inclusive of the spectrum of people's needs, then everybody can benefit. So I'd like us to maybe redefine disability. So disability, it's not necessarily a personal health condition. It's more of mismatched human interactions. So a mismatch between a person and a tool, or a person and a person. Yeah, it's more of a mismatch than a personal condition. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the persona spectrum. So this was put together by Microsoft, and we used the persona spectrum to get an idea of the related mismatches across a bunch of different scenarios. So they may be permanent, they may be temporary, or they may. And it's a quick tool. And the idea of it is to help us kind of create empathy and show how a solution that we're working on might scale to a broader audience. And some of the examples that they give are, say with the sense of touch, someone might have one arm or an injury, or a parent, or a sense of sight. Someone could be considered blind, or maybe they have a cataract, or maybe they're just distracted. Again, with hearing, someone could be considered deaf, but also someone's hearing could be affected by an ear infection. Or if you're in a loud environment, hearing is going to be affected for everybody. For example, in a noisy bar. In terms of speaking, then there's the nonverbal. Someone might be nonverbal, but then someone might have a throat infection or a laryngitis and be unable to speak. Or you may be speaking with someone who has a very heavy accent. So by considering people across the persona spectrum, you're able to create experiences that are better for everybody. The example that I'd like to focus on is, say, somebody with who maybe have lost an arm. If we design with them in mind, then we're also designing something that can be used by someone who has maybe sprained an arm or broken an arm. And that same solution then could also be used by somebody who's in a situation where they may have not have use of that arm for that particular time. For example, a new parent may be holding a baby. So, one good example of this that I think we'll all be familiar with is captions on videos. So captions on videos, they may be extremely useful for people who are hard of hearing, but I'm sure a lot of us have been in situations where maybe we're on a bus, or where we've forgotten our headphones and we want to watch a video, but we're not going to be able to play the audio. So captions come in really handy in this situation. So we can see how by creating something that helps someone who maybe can't hear at all, we're creating something that is better for everybody. Another example is the OXO peeler. This was created by a chef for his wife. So his wife has arthritis, and you can see quite clearly here that, by considering the needs of somebody with arthritis, a better product has been created that serves the needs of everybody. But of course, our needs will change over time. We're not going to stay exactly as we are. Somebody who may, have full use of everything right now, this will start to maybe deteriorate over time. So, as people get a bit older, maybe you start needing reading glasses, and then maybe the hearing starts to fade. And then at some point you might need something to help you walk, or even a wheelchair. And then for a lot of people, the cognitive functions start to shut down and slow down as they get older. So, it's without sounding too pessimistic, we're going to become a lot of us are going to become less able as time goes on. So our situation is going to change. So it is very, very important to remember that this is something that affects all of us. So we're not just designing for people with disabilities, we're designing for inclusivity. So factors like age, cognitive ability, context, location, these should all be considered from the very early stages. So how do we actually become more aware? Well, it starts with empathy. So it's about seeing with the eyes of another. listening with the ears of another, and feeling with the heart of another. So a while back, we had the opportunity to work with the Big Life Fix team. So Trevor and Chiara and the production team for RTE. And we got to meet Roisin Foley. So Roisin was suffering from motor neuron disease, and her condition was deteriorating pretty rapidly. And she was using the use of her speech and her movement as well. So she was a young lady. She had 3 small kids as well, and we had the opportunity to kind of help out on a project for her. So a team of us from Marino, we got together and we designed and developed an app that could help her communicate with her daughter, with her daughters, her family, and her friends. And here's just some screenshots from some of the work we did. So we put together an app that helped her to communicate. It was connected to beacons, so it was aware of who was nearby, and the content could adapt to suit. And it was designed very much with accessibility in mind, and for her particular use. And I think doing this, and speaking of empathy, it really gave us as a team a chance to come to just really get a sense of the people behind the products and the people behind the things that we're making. And it kind of reinvigorated our, we had started some work earlier on accessibility, but I think it really sparked something for us and kind of inspired us to push it a little bit further. So, empathy, it's all about walking in the shoes of others. And there's lots of ways to do this. So, there's things like an aging suit where you can dress up and actually experience maybe what it's like a little bit to be an older person. So everything is maybe slightly weighted down. You can't hear as well. And your vision might be slightly impaired as well. So it just really lets you to kind of, exactly, just walk in the shoes of that person. And, also we want to see through other people's eyes. So something that a lot of us take for granted is just, seeing normal colors, but a huge proportion of the population are colorblind. So we don't all see things the same way. So different types of colorblindness will cause people to see things quite differently. And here's just a quick example of an American football game, as someone who is colorblind might see it. I'm sorry. So you can see there, it's almost impossible to see what team has the ball and who's winning, etc. Another thing that we came across was, simulating what it might be like for somebody who maybe finds reading a little bit more challenging. I'm not sure how accurate this simulation is, but it helps to give an idea of what it might be like for someone who where reading is slightly more difficult. And then also, experiencing a device as other people might. So maybe changing the font size, and being aware that some people are using devices with the font size completely up. And when designing, another thing that you can do is to use the one thumb, one eyeball test, which simulates what it might be like for somebody who maybe has a disability or is just in a situation where something is less easy to use. So if you hold the device in one hand, maybe squint or close one eye, and then try and use the prototype or the app that you're working on. There's also laws and regulations. This is a really important thing to consider. And it's becoming more and more risky not to take accessibility seriously. So the Equal Status Act in Ireland, it prohibits the discrimination in the provision of goods and services, accommodation and education. And disability, of course, is included in the list of things covered there. An example of this is recently enough in Dublin Airport. They had to pay compensation to a man who was hard of hearing, and he couldn't hear the announcement over the loudspeaker, and he missed his flight. So Dublin Airport had to compensate him for that. There's also the Disability Act, and that basically states that, if a public body communicates in an electronic form with one or more persons, the head of the body shall ensure that as far as practical, the contents of the communication are accessible to persons with visual impairment to whom adaptive technology is available. So I think that's really important to remember. And there's also, increasingly more and more litigation for lack of accessibility. So if you do a search, especially in the United States, there's more and more litigation, and not just for public services. So, is it a matter of time before accessibility is mandatory for all? Yeah, I think it's looking increasingly likely that that is the case. So I'm going to hand you over to Kira now, and she's going to talk to you about, how can you get started on this journey. Over to you, Kira.
Thanks, Gareth. Yeah, sorry I can't share my video today, but we'll crack on anyway. So kind of Gareth mentioned there, working with Roisin in the Big Life Fix just kind of really reinvigorated us and really forced us to up our game in terms of what we're doing about accessibility. And so this is just a few of the things that we've done. Some of the things we didn't do that might have helped. Yeah, just I suppose a few tips to help you get started on your journey. You can, next slide, Gareth. Sorry. So Gareth has talked about starting. He's talked about starting with people. I think just in general design and development today, looking at the user needs, their perspectives. It's just what you do. It's no different when you're thinking about accessibility. There's probably some more specific needs that need to be met in terms of in terms of accessibility. But yeah, it's always the first place to start. The next place to start, or the next place to look, is to learn more about accessibility. And one of the key resources out there is this site, w3.org, WAI. So W3C is an international community that develops open standards to ensure the long-term growth of the web. And that's where the Web Accessibility Initiative lives. So the WAI is the home to lots of standards, guidelines, resources. They have lots of detail on user perspectives and the scenarios that we need to design for. It's a very comprehensive site. If you go there, it can be a little overwhelming looking at where to start, but they do actually give very detailed information, but high level information. So a lot of the content that you're going to see in the rest of the webinar is taken from this site, and also they run an introduction to web accessibility course, which I've been doing, and it's been great. So a lot of the content is coming from there. So one of the key resources on the site is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and for people who are producing web products and web applications, this is what you need to look for. It details kind of the requirements and the guidelines that you need to work towards to be able to reach a certain standard of accessibility. So governments, as Gareth had said, a lot of governments have made it mandatory for their own websites to be a certain standard of accessibility, which is usually the AA standard. And this gives you the details of what those requirements are. They separate them up into a number of different areas: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. But when you do go to this page, you'll see it can be quite overwhelming. You can see on the left all the list of the different guidelines that there are. There's lots of different links to try and help you understand the guidelines further, and links to the techniques that you can use to implement them. But yeah, as I said, it's a bit overwhelming. So we're just going to talk through a couple of items that will just help you start on the journey. So this website does provide tips for getting started with design and development. So we've just picked a couple of these tips out, and we'll just talk through them. So one of the first things is to provide clear and consistent navigation. You can see here just 2 pages from the site. The nav bar is accessible on both pages. The sidebar is the same on both pages as well. So it's pretty clear and consistent. Users will know where to go to expect things. Provide sufficient contrast and background. Obviously you can see on the left-hand side, the copy is a bit light and probably a bit harder to see than that on the left, and it's more clear on the right. So one of the other important things is to use headings and spacing to group related content. You can see here, say on the image on the left, you have an image and it's not particularly clear if that image is related to the main heading or the subheading, where you can see on the right, it's a lot more clearer. So that's kind of an element that is probably focused more on design. But if we look at the next slide, it's really important that like this structure and a clear layout is noted in the code as well. Assistive technologies will be using the code to communicate with the users that are using the technology. So it's really important that the structure is not only for visually for people, but also in code. It's pretty clear here. You can see the super bear saves the day is a H2, so a heading 2, and the content underneath that, the related articles, is a heading 3. So yeah, it's just important to have a structure that's meaningful in the code and in your design too. So kind of related to that, again, all about structure, is that ensuring that all interactive elements are keyboard accessible and easy to identify. So not all users are going to be able to use a mouse, and particularly with, so we need to kind of ensure that keyboard, a user can use the keyboard functions to navigate a site. But it's also important for assistive technology, where there could be users with limited mobility, where they only have a switch or a single switch or maybe 2 buttons that they can press to navigate. So making sure that all the interactive elements on your keyboard accessible will really benefit all types of assistive technologies. You can see here on the left, mainstream health and disability. It's very clear that that's what's highlighted, and you can see on the right as well the publications. So that's where the focus is on. So it's important to, I suppose, make sure that the element, it's clear what the user is focused on, and also when you're navigating the site, that it's like the order that you move over all the different interactive elements makes sense. So you can see the video on the left here.
Song details. Name. Hey Jude. Artists. The Beatles. Cost. $1.45.
So you can see, well, when you consider the reading order, it can make a lot more sense to kind of group things together, which you'll see here on this video.
Song details. Name, Hey Jude. Artists, The Beatles. Cost $1.45.
So it's really just going back to giving users with disabilities a better user experience when they're using your app or site. So one thing to call out when we talk about, I suppose we're talking about structure there, we're talking about keyboard interactivity. There are non-standard interactive elements. An example, say, is a drop-down menu, where additional effort is needed to make these items accessible. And this is all detailed in a section of the website called Why Aria. So it is important, yeah, just to consider those elements that are hidden initially. So ensuring that form elements include clearly associated labels. This is important, obviously, just visually, so you know your email is associated, you know the fields that you need to enter your email in, but it's important, again, for using screen readers and assistive technology, that's included in the code too. So this is an example, again, of when you don't label, what it's like for a user using, say, a screen reader, when you don't label your interactive elements correctly.
Jukebox. Enter favorite song. Edit. Go button. Double unlabeled button. Double tap to activate. Labels available. Use swipe up then right to view. Unlabeled button. Share button. Pause button. Double play.
So it's just like
Pause.
if you're a user with the screen reader, it's so important for you to be able to use the application, just to have a simple thing such as labeling buttons included in the code. So include media alternatives in your design. So Gareth's already talked about closed captions on videos, but I thought another interesting one is, say, for podcasts, it's including a transcript of the podcast on your website as well. So alternative text for images, it's again kind of linked to the media alternatives. So it's making sure images on your site have alternate text. Again, it's making it readable for assistive technology and screen readers. And one thing to consider here is that not only it's important to ensure that you have the alternative text, but to make sure that it's concise and meaningful. So you can see on the top image here, the alternative text is very much describing the City Lights logo, how it's laid out, but that's not really needed. It just City Lights or access to the city. That's the key element, the key bit of data and information that a user needs. So it's ensuring that, yeah, your alt text is it's concise and meaningful. So provide controls for content that starts automatically. So a lot of different users, say with cognitive disabilities, might find a lot of autoplay elements distracting. So ensuring that there's a way for users to control the speed at which the content is moving is important. So you can see here, there's a button play on the right, which means that, say, the carousel would move through the images by itself, or else the user can pause that and just navigate using the buttons at the bottom or the arrows on the side. Identify identify page language and language changes. So this is just, again, in code, making sure that the language that the site is using is clear. This helps assistive technologies, but just browsers, they can render text more accurately when the language is identifiable. And say for screen readers, they'd be able to load the correct pronunciation if they know what language it should be in. Provide easily identifiable feedback and help users avoid mistakes. So again, you can see a user is filling in a form on the left, and on the right is the excuse me. So the form on the left is what the user needs to fill in. If you clicked submit without filling anything in, you would get the details on the right. So you're trying to help users tell them what they need to do and make it very clear how they can rectify their mistakes. Create designs for different viewport sizes and write code that adapts to the user's technology. So you can see here there's different images. On the left is the mobile, on the right is iPad, and in the middle is iPad, and on the right is desktop. So it's just making sure that your designs and your code are adaptable to the different screen sizes that a user might use. Okay, so they were kind of just going through the tips on some elements of where you might get started in looking at like very actionable items that you can do to start looking at accessibility. But if you're looking to like how can you grow the accessibility in your company, one of the first places to start is building your team. And it's really important that this is cross-functional, across business analysis, design, development, and testing. Everybody has a part to play in making a site accessible. I think sharing the load as well helps to make sure that there's not too much time and effort spent. But yeah, building the team around you. What we did here, we started, we created the accessibility team, and we started looking through some of the the requirements, and it was great to get everyone's different perspective and understanding of what a requirement is. So I think that's really important to start building your team. The next step would be to get support from management and build a business case. So I'm a project manager, and budget and time and effort are all the things that we need to think about. So just if you're trying to build a business case and look at, well, okay, how much effort is really needed? If you look at some of the actions that we've gone through there, so you can see provide clear and consistent navigation options. These are just the elements that we've gone through. And you think about the effort that would be required from, say, a business analyst, design, or dev point of view. A lot of the things that we've gone through here are they're just best practice. They're probably things that we're doing anyway, both from a design perspective and a development perspective. There are elements where, you know, more effort be required. You can see here, so include media alternatives in design. So say if you had a video and you needed to create a transcript, there's probably effort and work there needed from a BA to make sure that you have the content for that transcript. If you can move on to the next slide there. Yeah. And again, some of the kind of, I think the development tasks are a little bit higher. So reflect reading order and code, medium effort, and providing meaning for non-standard elements. So that's like making the drop-down menus accessible. So I've put them up here as medium effort, but I guess it can really depend on your site. Do you have a lot of those type of elements? If you have a site that's across, you know, for desktop and mobile, do they look the same? And will the reading, the kind of the reading order be the same across desktop and mobile? So I suppose there's elements of those two actions that are quite low, but it's, I suppose in general low, but you will get those points where it can be, you will have elements that are quite tricky to make accessible. So it's trying to cater for that. So then just looking at the summary of all those actions there and how much effort's needed, you can see that like the majority of things you should be doing anyway as part of best practice. There are a couple of items that are low effort, and there's a few more items that would be medium high effort. But I suppose the point to get across here is that you can make your site accessible with very little effort. And even if you're not making the site fully accessible, even doing something like starting on your journey of accessibility, it's a small step to take, really. You can do it with a little bit of effort. But then comes the testing, which there's no way around it. It is highest effort. It is an area that has the highest effort. You can't really avoid that. There are tools that check certain elements of automation, of accessibility. So it's great to use them, but you will need manual efforts. You will need manual effort. There are things like, even taking the example of the alternative text, an automated tool will tell you that you have alternative text associated with an image, but it won't tell you if it's concise, if it's meaningful, or even if it's the right text. That does take manual effort to check that. But again, looking at where to start. So what we've always done here is checking the font size on devices, or checking how the design looks when you change the font sizes, checking how it's in portrait and landscape modes. They're kind of small, straightforward elements that you can start with from a manual perspective. And there are a number of different tools that we'll talk a little bit about later that you can use. So Wave is for desktop, and Accessibility and Scanner and Inspector are for iOS and Android. Kind of in the longer term, when you're thinking about testing, I guess it's doing, say, a manual check against all the requirements in the WCAG, which when we were doing our journey, I've tried it a couple of times on sites just to try and help myself get a better understanding of the requirements, and it does take time. But it's probably something that maybe can be streamlined in the future. Using screen readers is another, it takes a bit more time, but it's really valuable thing to do. I think it's really interesting when I did try and look into this, just learning how to use a screen reader actually took a lot of the time. But it just highlights, you know, the difficulty that users have using, like they have to learn how to use the screen readers, and then they have to use it on the site. So it's like, if we can help people by just having a few items, like the low effort items, it just goes a long way. And ultimately, we'd love to start testing with people with disabilities. I guess we just need to look into, from our own perspective, we just need to look into logistics of doing that. Business benefits. Yeah, okay. So again, we're trying to get buy-in from senior management. You're trying to get them to say, okay, it's okay for you to put this extra time into dev, into design, into testing. I suppose what are they going to get back from it? So a couple of the items, say brand reputation. If you're trying to be more inclusive and consider diversity for your users, you have an opportunity to increase your customer base and your customer reach, which ultimately might help to increase revenue. So Gareth has talked about 13.5% of the population in Ireland has a disability. But if you think about the aging population, they would benefit from having the site accessible, but they're not considered as a person. Well, they may not consider themselves or in the census to be a person with a disability. So like, if you're thinking there's 13.5%, there's an aging population on top of that. Another example is, say, with transcripts. You benefit for users who speak a different language, say if it's in English, they'd be able to use tools to help translate. So I think I say it further down, but you're designing for, say, you're thinking about accessibility, but you're benefiting so many more people. And therefore increasing your customer reach. SEO benefits when for your media and your images, including the alternative text or something like transcripts, can help your site be indexed by search engines. And there was really interesting, on the website you'll see there's a site for business cases, and they talked about NPR, which has This American Life podcast. I'm not sure if any of you have come across it. It's really good. But they found that just by including transcripts, their search traffic increased by 6%. They had included by 6%, and they had better comprehension for visitors who had English as a second language. I suppose then driving innovation. So if you think of autocomplete, voice control, and text-to-speech were all started, the functionality started with users with disabilities in mind, but that's something that we're nearly all using at this stage. So yeah, it's focusing on one person, but it's benefiting so many more. And then corporate social responsibility. I think this is really important in terms of trying to think of I suppose I've called it the accessibility ecosystem, but this was a report that came across from the Disability Federation of Ireland and Enable Ireland, and they're trying to have a bit more structure around how people with disabilities get access to assistive technology and the costs around that. But if you think about, they have to go to a lot of effort maybe to get access to the assistive technology, and they could visit our sites, but the site isn't accessible. So it's trying to, we have to work, I suppose we're people who create products for the web, but a lot of the accessibility tools will be for the people who create the browsers. They're people who create the media, for creating media content. So there's so many people involved in making sure that people with disabilities can use the web. So it's just playing our part in that by making our websites accessible. So we're going to talk a little bit about the tools, and I'm going to hand back to Gareth for that.
Thanks a million, Ciara. So the first thing is plain English. This is really important when we are writing content for the web or for apps. And one tool that I think is really, really good for this that I'd highly recommend checking out is Hemingway. And what you can do with Hemingway is, put in your copy, but it will give you a readability score, which is based on the American skill system grades. It will also highlight sentences that may be difficult to read. It will tell you maybe difficult words that you might be able to swap out with a simpler word. And overall, it just helps you to write simpler copy. And of course, the copy will depend on the audience that you're targeting. But I think it's a really, really good tool, and I'd recommend it for any kind of web copywriting. Some of the design tools that we use are Stark. So this is really good for simulating color blindness. So if you're putting together a screen and you're using color, you can very quickly see what it looks like to people with different types of color blindness. And you can see here, something like red and green. It's used all the time to symbolize positive and negative, or success and failure. But you can see how for people that are colorblind, it just does not make sense. So it kind of highlights how we should never rely on color alone. And it's just a really handy tool to run things through. Another really handy tool is the color contrast checker. So if you're designing a screen, you can take your foreground and your background, and it will tell you straight away, is it accessible or not? And to what level? Is it AA or AAA? And what I think is brilliant about this tool as well is that you can actually tweak in place, and you can, change the color and just tweak and tweak and tweak until you get it exactly as you want it. So you can visually see, is it AA or AAA? It's a really good tool. I'd highly recommend trying that one. I'm going to hand you back to Kira, who's going to talk to you about some testing tools.
Okay, so we're just looking at the Wave tool here, and I hope there's no one from the NCT on the webinar. It's not too bad anyway. So the Wave tool, it's a plugin. You go to the site, you can just click a button, and you'll see here it does a quick assessment of your site. The details you can see there on the right hand side. You can go into that tab and you get a bit more detail of what those errors are. It can highlight where they are on the page as well. So it's just, we talked about alternative text and contrast. This is a pretty quick and simple way to be able to assess a desktop page. And then Android and iOS, they also have their own tools that allow you to assess accessibility as you develop. So they just highlight the errors here, and that's the devs and the QA can easily use that to try and assess accessibility on an app. So yeah, I'm gonna hand back to Gareth then to do a bit of a closing.
Yeah. So we're just about done. I suppose the main point that we want people to take away is that it's about spreading awareness around accessibility. It's about talking about it and starting those conversations. So we might have a few minutes for some questions. I can't actually see if any have come in.
Yeah, I can see some, so I'll just read it out. When designing an interface, any tips to make sure your contrast between text and backgrounds or images is accessible?
I'm glad you asked. So I think we've covered that earlier on. You can use the contrast plugin, so you can get that for Figma or Sketch or any other design tool. That's what I would recommend doing.
So I liked another question. I like the example of the reader. Was it available in the official W3C website, or are you aware of any good ones to use for testing a website or apps? Okay, so hopefully we have covered a little bit of that with looking at the Wave tool, and then iOS and Android do have their own testing tools accessibility scanner and inspector. But if you do go to the W3 site, they do have a whole section of testing tools that you can use. I think one of the big things about testing tools is that they seem to be quite specific to a requirement. So you might need to cover a few of them to get what you're looking for. But they are, yeah, there's a whole big long section there on the website. Sorry, next question. I saw that Big Life Fix project on RT a while back. Very impressive work and great show. What were the main accessibility challenges for building Roisin's app?
One thing we came up, well, obviously her movement was deteriorating, so she found it very hard to reach across the screen. It was on the tablet, so I suppose we learned that, you know, putting the buttons in a place that was easy for her to reach and hover over, making sure that they were the right size, they had the right hit area, and then as well just making sure that the content was, you know, well laid out, good contrast, just very easy to see. And yeah, also there was we integrated so Connor was able to get a kind of a head tracking controller working so that Roisin could actually control the app by just using subtle head movements.
I think, sorry, just on that as well, like when we started off with Roisin, it was very much looking at the app and the size of the buttons, and it was nearly because she was deteriorating a bit more quicker that we kind of really, it was really important then to start looking at the eye gaze tools.
Yeah.
So that was kind of something that was probably going to be more like a roadmap item you would have seen, but it was needed a lot sooner as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all. Which industries would you say should pay closer attention to accessibility, if any in particular? I might just start on that. I don't think there is any industry that, I don't think there's any in particular. Like if you went back to that report from the Disability Federation of Ireland and Enable Ireland, you're saying assistive technology is helping people to further their education. It's helping them get a job. It's, you know, and if you, like, you need to set up a bank account, you need to go on the site and you need to research your jobs, you need to research roles. For your education, again, you're going onto sites, reading information for your assignments. I don't think there's any in particular. I think it's any industry that affects anyone in their everyday life is going to have to consider accessibility. I think it's just very widespread.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. Like, it'd be very hard to draw a line and say, you know, these people should be put above these people, or this industry. But I guess, you know, when it is like an essential public service, maybe that could, you know, could take some priority. But yeah, I think I agree with Kira. It should be across the board.
So there's more questions coming in. Are there any tools for testing data bandwidth accessibility, e.g. for people with poor network connection? And just said, thanks for doing this talk. It's been very informative. Thank you very much, John, for coming along. So are there any tools for testing bandwidth accessibility?
I'm not an expert on this, but I know within the developer tools in the browsers, there may be ways of seeing how much bandwidth is being used, or, you know, the sizes and how quickly things are downloading. And there's possibly simulators, but I'm not sure. But that's something that we can look into and follow up on later.
Yeah, I was just to say that. So, like, I know internally we do have a slow-fi where our testers can test apps with lower bandwidth. So yeah, I think we can check it out with them and maybe get back to you on that. Are voice apps more accessible than regular apps?
I think it depends. You know, if you can type or use your voice, great. but you know, you got to remember that not everyone is able to actually speak, so it really depends on the situation. But I think the more modes of interacting with it, the better. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, Gareth, you said something there about the more modes you have. I think one of the things that I have found as we've looked over accessibility is that it's really making your site adaptable. So if you, like one thing I discovered on the course is that when you talk of people with low vision, you're assuming that people want larger font size, and you need to make sure that you can increase it. But there are certain conditions where a larger font size won't help them. Actually, smaller font size helps the users for a particular condition. So it's like you're saying, it's having adaptability and flexibility in your site. If you go, if you actually visit, say, there's an As I Am website that I referenced there, and the Disability Federation of Ireland, they actually have at the top of their sites, there's accessibility tools where you can choose the font size that you're using, or you can choose the color that you're using with the contrast. So yeah, I think making things adaptable, whatever app you're using is app or website or app, it's really important. We just got some information from one of our devs. So for apps, you can set bandwidth limits on the simulators. For real devices, you can share the internet connection from your laptop and use tools to throttle the bandwidth or even simulate a certain error rate.
Cool.
Okay, thanks very much, Aaron.
Do we have time for one more? I know we're coming up to 3 o'clock.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, there's one more here. How could you get a person with no voice or mobility to use an app? Thanks for all the info, guys. No voice or no mobility to use an app.
Yeah, I think so from the research we did when we were helping out with the Big Life Fix, it's probably the eyes. So eye gaze or subtle eye movements, and there is software out there that specializes in that. So yeah, it's probably figuring out how to use that, how to adapt it or integrate it into the app. Yeah, I think
that's all the questions anyway.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, it's just coming up to 3 o'clock. So yeah, we're right on time. Yeah, I'd just like to thank you again for joining. And if you'd like to get a copy of the slides, just go onto our website and send us a message, and we'll send them on to you. And if you have any other questions or want to follow up or carry on the conversation, yeah, so just thanks again on behalf of everyone who on the whole accessibility team. And for everyone who joined today, really appreciate it. And yeah, we hope you can go and spread some awareness about Global Accessibility Awareness Day. And thank you.